His bedroom was a secret world. After he died on August 16th, 1977, the upstairs of Graceland was sealed. It remains sealed to this day. Only a handful of people have ever been inside since. But we know what was in there. We know from police reports, from the memories of his last girlfriend, Ginger Alden, and from the members of his inner circle. What they found was not the sanctuary of a king. It was the cluttered, isolated space of a man in deep trouble. The objects left behind tell a story. They are not just things. They are clues. A book on the Shroud of Turin sits near a book on numerology. A medical commode sits near a stash of junk food. An oxygen tank is in the same room as a collection of police badges. Each item is a piece of a puzzle. A puzzle about a man who had everything and nothing at the same time. Why was his room kept at a freezing temperature? Why did he have 3 televisions running at once? And what does the last book he was reading tell us about his state of mind in his final hours? These are not just questions about stuff. They are questions about Elvis Presley, the man, not the myth. Out number 18, why did he need 3 televisions he could watch at once? Elvis Presley had 3 televisions in his bedroom. They were set up side by side. This was long before picture-in-picture or split-screen technology. If you wanted to watch more than one channel, you needed more than one television. And Elvis wanted to watch everything. He reportedly kept them on constantly, tuned to the 3 major networks of the time, ABC, NBC, and CBS. This setup was more than just a rich man's toy. It was a window into his deep isolation and his complicated relationship with the outside world. From his bedroom, he was a king surveying his kingdom. But his kingdom was the media landscape that he both dominated and felt alienated from. He could see the news, the talk shows, the movies, all at once. It was a way to feel connected to a world he could no longer walk through freely. By the 1970s, leaving Graceland was a military-style operation. He was a prisoner of his own fame. The TVs were his eyes and ears. This need for constant stimulation also points to a man who could not stand silence. Silence meant being alone with his thoughts, and for Elvis, that was often a dangerous place. The constant hum of the televisions, the flicker of the screens, filled a void. There is a famous story told by multiple members of his Memphis Mafia about Elvis and his TVs. One night, singer Robert Goulet appeared on one of the screens. For reasons known only to him, Elvis pulled out a pistol and shot the television. The story is often told as a funny anecdote, a sign of his eccentric rock and roll behavior. But it is also a sign of a man with immense unchecked power and a fragile ego, lashing out at an inanimate object because he could. His bedroom was his fortress, and inside it, he made the rules. If he did not like what he saw on his window to the world, he could simply destroy it. The presence of 3 televisions reveals a man desperate for information and connection, but on his own terms. He was a passive observer, not an active participant. This setup was common in television studios and newsrooms, places of professional observation. For Elvis, his bedroom had become a control room. He was monitoring the world. This desire for control was a theme throughout his life, from his career choices to his personal relationships. Yet, in the end, the things he could not control, like his health and his addictions, were the ones that mattered most. The televisions were a powerful illusion of control in a life that was spiraling out of it. They were a noisy, bright, colorful distraction from the quiet decay happening within the 4 walls of his room. What was he so afraid of missing if he only watched one channel? Was he watching the news for mentions of himself, or was he trying to forget himself by watching others? In a room designed for sleep and rest, why did he surround himself with constant noise and light? Number 17, what was a medical commode chair doing in the bedroom of a king? Among the plush carpets and gold-plated fixtures, there was a stark clinical object of a commode chair. This is essentially a portable toilet, a device used by people who are too ill, weak, or obese to make it to the bathroom. Its presence in Elvis Presley's bedroom is a brutal testament to the state of his health in his final years. This was not the vibrant, hip, swiveling Elvis of the 1950s. This was a man whose body was failing him. By 1977, Elvis was suffering from a host of medical problems. His weight had ballooned, and he suffered from high blood pressure, an enlarged colon, and digestive issues. The combination of these ailments and the disorienting effects of the prescription drugs he was taking made simple tasks like walking to the bathroom difficult and sometimes impossible. The commode chair was a practical necessity. It was a symbol of surrender to his physical limitations. It tells a story of dependency and indignity, a stark contrast to the powerful, virile image he maintained on stage. Dr. George Nichopoulos, Elvis's personal physician, often spoke about the singer's complex health issues after his death. In his book, The King and Dr. Nick, he detailed the severity of Elvis's constipation and colon problems, a condition called megacolon. He argued that these underlying chronic health issues, rather than just drug abuse, were central to Elvis's decline. The commode chair supports this narrative. It wasn't there because he was lazy. It was there because he was profoundly unwell. His body, which had been his instrument of fame and fortune, had become his prison. The commode chair also speaks to the isolation of his world. The upstairs of Graceland was his private domain, and the people within it were tasked with managing the growing gap between the public myth of Elvis and the private reality. They had to procure the food he craved, the drugs he demanded, and the medical equipment he needed. The chair was part of this secret, sad reality. It was hidden from the fans, hidden from the world. It showed that the king needed the same kind of help as any elderly or infirm person. The image is jarring: the man who sold 1 billion records, who mesmerized millions, being dependent on such a basic medical device. It strips away the glamour and reveals a very human, very frail man. Did Elvis feel shame seeing that chair in his room every day, or was it just another part of a life that no longer felt like his own? How could the people around him reconcile the sight of that commode with the dazzling jumpsuits hanging in his closet? Did the presence of such a raw symbol of sickness make his inevitable death feel more real to those who were there? Number 16, why was his room filled with styrofoam cups, plastic utensils, and burnt spoons? The scene inside Elvis's private quarters often resembled a makeshift hospital room mixed with a fast food restaurant. Reports from those who saw the room describe a landscape of disposable items. There were piles of styrofoam cups, used plastic forks and spoons, and paper plates were a common sight. This wasn't because he was a slob. It was a manifestation of a deep-seated germophobia and a set of bizarre personal rituals that governed his isolated life. Priscilla Presley wrote about his fear of germs in her book, Elvis and Me. She described how he hated using regular silverware if someone else had touched it. He preferred drinking from a bottle or a cup that no one else's lips had touched. At home, this translated into an obsession with disposable items. It was a way to ensure purity and control in his immediate environment. This fear of contamination from the outside world mirrored his own retreat from it. As his fame grew, his world shrank and his phobias intensified. Everything had to be clean, new, and untouched. This behavior is related to obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD. While Elvis was never formally diagnosed, his rigid routines, phobias, and need for control are classic symptoms. According to the International OCD Foundation, germophobia or mysophobia is a common manifestation of the disorder. It is an anxiety-driven condition, and Elvis had plenty to be anxious about. The pressure of his fame, his declining health, and his drug dependency created a perfect storm for such anxieties to flourish. The disposable cups and plates were a coping mechanism, a way to exert some small measure of control when everything else felt chaotic. The burnt spoons are a more sinister detail. Members of his entourage have spoken about finding spoons with burnt, blackened bottoms. These were allegedly used to prepare his injections of prescription drugs. While Dr. Nichopoulos administered many of his shots, Elvis and others around him also did. The burnt spoons are a grim piece of physical evidence of the mechanics of his addiction. They are a stark reminder that his drug use wasn't just about popping pills. It involved the grim ritual of injections, a sign of a much more serious and advanced stage of dependency. The contrast between a clean, sterile styrofoam cup and a burnt, dirty spoon in the same room is a powerful metaphor for the dual reality of his life. A desperate attempt to maintain purity on one hand, and a deep dive into self-destruction on the other. Was his fear of germs a rational response to a world where everyone wanted a piece of him, or was it a sign of a deeper psychological breakdown? Did he see the contradiction in demanding a sterile cup for his soda while using a burnt spoon for a drug injection? How much of his daily life was consumed by these rituals, and did they bring him any real comfort or just add to his isolation? Number 15, what does a copy of the Shroud of Turin reveal about his final search for a miracle? On the night he died, Elvis Presley was reading. The book found near his body was The Shroud of Turin, The Burial Cloth of Jesus Christ by Ian Wilson. This was a popular book in 1977, exploring the mystery of the famous linen cloth, believed by many to be the burial shroud of Jesus. The fact that this was his final reading material is incredibly revealing. It shows a man not distracted by celebrity magazines or novels, but one deeply engrossed in a search for spiritual truth and perhaps a miracle. Elvis's interest in religion and spirituality was a lifelong journey, far more complex than his public image as a gospel-singing good old boy suggested. He was raised in the Assembly of God Church, and gospel music was his first love. But as he got older, his spiritual quest expanded. He read voraciously, exploring everything from Eastern mysticism and theosophy to numerology and esoteric Christianity. He met with gurus like Sridhar Mata of the Self-Realization Fellowship. His personal library was filled with hundreds of spiritual books, with passages heavily underlined and notes scribbled in the margins. He was a genuine seeker. The Shroud of Turin would have fascinated him. It is an object that sits at the intersection of faith, science, and mystery. It represents the possibility of physical proof of the divine. For a man like Elvis, whose life was a strange mix of the material and the spiritual, this would have been a powerful concept. He had achieved God-like status in the eyes of his fans, but he was trapped in a very mortal, failing body. He was in constant pain, both physical and emotional. The story of the Shroud is a story of suffering, death, and the promise of resurrection. It is not hard to imagine why this would resonate with him in his final hours. The book choice reflects a man grappling with his own mortality. He was 42 years old, but he was living on borrowed time and he knew it. His health was shattered, and he was deeply unhappy. In the story of the Shroud, he may have been looking for reassurance, a sign that there was something more beyond the pain of his current existence. According to Ginger Alden, who was with him that night, he was excited about the book, talking to her about its theories. It was not a casual read. It was the final chapter in his long search for answers. This search was as much a part of him as the music, but it was a part he could not fully share with his adoring public. The book is a quiet, profound clue to the state of his soul at the very end. Was he reading the book as a believer, a skeptic, or something in between? Did he see a parallel between the suffering depicted on the Shroud and his own private pain? If he had lived, would his spiritual quest have led him to a place of peace, or would he have continued to search endlessly for an answer that was always out of reach? Number 14. Why did a man who had everything need an intercom to the kitchen? Elvis's bedroom was connected to the Graceland kitchen by a direct intercom system. This was not unusual for a large house, but the way Elvis used it was. The intercom was his lifeline, his method of summoning the food and drink that became one of his primary comforts in his final years. It was a tool of his isolation. He could get whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted, without having to leave his sanctuary or interact with the world. The intercom was a symbol of both his power and his imprisonment. The stories of his late-night food orders are legendary. His cook, Mary Jenkins, wrote a book called Elvis in the Kitchen, where she detailed his specific and often eccentric cravings. He could call down at 3 a.m. and order a fool's gold loaf, an entire loaf of Italian bread, hollowed out and filled with a pound of bacon, a jar of peanut butter, and a jar of grape jelly. Or he would demand a dozen cheeseburgers. The kitchen staff was on call 24/7 to cater to his whims. The intercom was the instrument of these commands. It was a one-way street, he would speak, and someone downstairs would obey. This system reinforced his isolation. He did not have to join others for meals. He did not have to engage in conversation. He could simply press a button and have his desires fulfilled. This further detached him from the normal rhythms of life. His days and nights were inverted. He slept most of the day and came alive at night, and the intercom was his connection to the day world staff who served him. Food was clearly a source of great comfort for him, a throwback to his humble southern upbringing. But in his later years, this comfort eating became a form of self-medication, another addiction alongside the prescription drugs. The intercom facilitated this behavior, removing any friction or effort from the process of consumption. The intercom also highlights the strange power dynamic within Graceland. Elvis was the king, and everyone else was there to serve him. This was not a healthy environment. It enabled his worst impulses and shielded him from reality. No one could tell him no. If he wanted 10 bacon and banana sandwiches, the intercom crackled and the order was filled. This system, meant for convenience, became a part of the bubble that protected and ultimately suffocated him. He was a man who could communicate with millions from a stage, but often chose to communicate with the people in his own house through a plastic speaker. Did the sound of the intercom become a source of dread for the kitchen staff, wondering what colossal order was coming next? Did Elvis ever feel a pang of loneliness as he spoke into the machine, knowing he was ordering food to be eaten alone? How much did this easy access to unlimited comfort food contribute to the catastrophic decline in his health? Number 13, why was a rock and roll star obsessed with collecting police badges? In Elvis's private quarters, you would find something unexpected. Alongside the gold records and jumpsuits, a vast collection of police badges, police uniforms, and law enforcement paraphernalia. This was not a passing hobby. It was a deep, lifelong obsession. He had honorary badges from police departments all across the country. He would flash a badge during traffic stops. He even had flashing blue lights installed on his personal cars. This fascination culminated in his famous December 1970 meeting with President Richard Nixon, where his primary goal was to obtain a badge from the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. This obsession seems to contradict his rock and roll rebel image. But for Elvis, law enforcement represented order, authority, and legitimacy. He was a deeply patriotic and conservative man. He saw police officers as heroes, symbols of the establishment he admired, even as his music was seen as a threat to it. Collecting their badges was a way of aligning himself with that power. It was a way for the boy from Tupelo, Mississippi, who grew up poor, to feel like he was part of the ultimate insiders club. He was not just Elvis the entertainer. He was Elvis the honorary police officer, a friend to sheriffs and chiefs. The desire for a federal narcotics agent badge was particularly ironic. At the very time he was meeting with Nixon to volunteer his services in the war on drugs, his own prescription drug use was becoming a serious problem. This is a classic case of psychological projection. He may have genuinely believed he could help fight the problem of illegal street drugs while completely compartmentalizing his own dependency on legal, prescribed medications. In his mind, there was a clear line between the two. The badge would give him the ultimate authority, a symbol of being on the right side of the law, which perhaps helped him rationalize his own behavior. The badges were also a form of a backstage pass to the entire world. When he was pulled over for speeding, he would show the officer his badge, and they would often end up just chatting and getting an autograph. It was a tool that allowed him to move through the world with a special status to turn a potentially negative encounter into a positive one. It was another layer of insulation from the real world that everyone else experiences. The badges were not just collector's items. They were symbols of a power and access that even his incredible fame did not automatically grant him. They made him feel official, important, and protected. Was his obsession with law enforcement a way to connect with his late twin brother's name, Jesse Garon, which sounded like a Wild West lawman? Did he truly believe he could be an effective anti-drug agent, or was he just seeking a symbol of authority to make himself feel righteous? How did the police officers who gave him these badges reconcile his rock and roll lifestyle with the conservative values they represented? Number 12, why was his bed so unusually large and almost always unmade? The centerpiece of Elvis's bedroom was his bed. It was a huge, custom-made bed set on a carpeted platform. It was his throne, his office, and his dining room. It was the place where he spent the majority of his time in his final years. And it was almost always unmade. The image of the rumpled sheets and blankets speaks volumes about the state of his life. It was a life that had lost its structure, its discipline, and its purpose. The bed was the center of his shrinking universe. From there, he could watch his 3 televisions, talk on the phone, read his spiritual books, and eat his meals. He conducted business from his bed. He socialized with his inner circle from his bed. It was his command center, but it was also his retreat. As his health failed and his dependency on drugs grew, the bed became a place of refuge from a world that demanded too much of him. The simple act of getting up, getting dressed, and facing the day had become a monumental effort. The fact that it was perpetually unmade is significant. On a simple level, he had staff who would have made it for him if he had wished. The messy bed was his choice. It reflects a deep depression and a profound lethargy. Making one's bed is a fundamental act of starting the day, of imposing order on chaos. For Elvis, the chaos had won. His sleep schedule was completely reversed. He would often go to bed as the sun was rising and sleep until the afternoon. The bed was never really done for the day, because his days had no clear beginning or end. They blended into one long twilight existence. This is a common symptom of clinical depression. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, Changes in sleep patterns, loss of energy, and a loss of interest in daily activities are key indicators of the illness. Elvis exhibited all of these. The unmade bed was not a sign of rock and roll decadence. It was a sign of mental and physical exhaustion. It was the nest of a man who was unwell and had largely given up on the routines of a normal life. It was in the bathroom connected to this bedroom, just steps from this bed, that his body finally gave out. The state of his bed was a silent, daily testament to his slow-motion surrender. Did he find any real comfort in that bed, or was it a constant reminder of his own inertia and decline? Did anyone in his circle ever try to encourage him to get up and start his day, or had everyone accepted his nocturnal, bed-centered life as the new normal? What did Ginger Alden think, waking up each day in a room that was so clearly the habitat of a man in the grips of a deep depression? Number 11, what was a .22 caliber pistol doing on his bedside table? Elvis Presley always had guns nearby. He was a connoisseur and a collector. In his bedroom, there was often a pistol within arm's reach. On his nightstand, a .22 caliber pistol was a common fixture. This was not for show. Elvis was known to be impulsive with his firearms, as the story of him shooting the television proves. The constant presence of a loaded weapon in the bedroom of a man who is often disoriented by prescription drugs is a chilling detail. His love for guns was rooted in his Southern upbringing and his fascination with law enforcement. Guns symbolized power, protection, and control. In his isolated world, where he felt both constantly watched and perpetually vulnerable, a gun may have provided a sense of security. He was famous for giving lavish gifts, and custom-made pistols were among his favorites to give to his friends. For him, a gun was not just a weapon, it was an artifact of power and friendship. However, the gun in the bedroom tells a darker story. It speaks to a deep-seated paranoia. Who did he feel he needed protection from inside his own fortress of Graceland? The gun was a physical manifestation of his fears. His fame had brought him love and adoration, but it also brought threats and strange encounters with obsessed fans. The gun was a final line of defense against a world he no longer trusted. The combination of firearms and powerful drugs is a recipe for disaster. Elvis was known for his volatile mood swings, which were undoubtedly exacerbated by the cocktail of medications he was taking. His thoughts could be irrational, his actions unpredictable. Having a loaded weapon so readily available was incredibly dangerous, not just to others, but also to himself. While there is no evidence to suggest he was suicidal in the traditional sense, his overall lifestyle was a slow-motion form of suicide. The gun was another element in this toxic mix of self-destructive behavior. It was a tool of ultimate control, a power over life and death, sitting next to a man who had lost control over his own life. This habit was not a secret. Priscilla Presley and other members of the Memphis Mafia have talked about his reckless behavior with guns. He would sometimes shoot them off indoors out of boredom or anger. The gun on the nightstand was part of the accepted, bizarre reality of life at Graceland. It was just another of Elvis's eccentricities. But viewed through the lens of his tragic death, it looks less like an eccentricity and more like a symbol of the danger he was in, and the danger he posed in his final days. Did he ever wake up in a drug-induced haze and not remember why the gun was there? Was there ever a moment when his depression and the easy access to a weapon could have led to a different, more violent end? How did the people living in the house with him sleep at night, knowing that a heavily medicated and emotionally volatile man had a loaded pistol by his bed? Number 10. Why did he keep oxygen tanks in a bedroom? Another piece of medical equipment found in Elvis's bedroom was an oxygen tank, or at times multiple tanks. The official reason for their presence was to help him combat cluster headaches or to recover after a strenuous live performance. While these may have been legitimate uses, the tanks also point to a more serious problem: respiratory distress, a common and dangerous side effect of the powerful narcotics and sedatives he was taking. The drugs Elvis favored, like Demerol, Dilaudid, and Quaaludes, are all central nervous system depressants. In high doses, they can slow down a person's breathing to dangerously low levels, a condition known as respiratory depression. This is the primary cause of death in opioid overdoses. Elvis was a chronic, high-dose user. It is highly likely that he experienced episodes where his breathing became shallow and inefficient. The oxygen tanks were a way to counteract this terrifying side effect. They were a tool to pull him back from the edge, to allow him to continue his high-risk drug use. Dr. Nikopoulos would have known the dangers. The presence of oxygen suggests that medical emergencies were anticipated. The bedroom was not just a place of rest, it was a private recovery room. Imagine the scene: Elvis, so sedated he could barely breathe, being given oxygen by a doctor or an aide to keep him stable. This was a regular part of the routine of maintaining the king. The oxygen tanks were a stark, clinical sign of just how close to the line he was pushing his body every single day. They were part of the elaborate system designed to keep him alive and functional enough to get back on stage, where he could earn the money that paid for this entire destructive lifestyle. The tanks also represent a desperate attempt to maintain his health through artificial means. Instead of addressing the root cause of his problems, the drug dependency, and the underlying health issues, he and his team were treating the symptoms. Trouble breathing, use oxygen, gaining weight, take diet pills, can't sleep, take sleeping pills, can't wake up, take stimulants. It was a constant chemical battle being waged within his body, and the oxygen tank was another weapon in the arsenal. It was not a tool for healing, it was a tool for maintenance. It helped keep the broken machine running just a little bit longer. Who made the decision that oxygen tanks were necessary? And was it a tacit admission that his drug use was life-threatening? Did Elvis understand the danger he was in when he needed oxygen to breathe? Or did he see it as just another perk of being a star? How many times was an oxygen tank used to revive him from a near overdose that the public never knew about? Number 9. What was a book on numerology doing next to the Bible? Elvis's spiritual search was eclectic. He did not limit himself to one path. This is perfectly illustrated by 2 books often found on his nightstand, the Bible and Chiro's Book of Numbers. One is the foundational text of Western religion. The other is a guide to numerology, the belief that numbers hold a mystical significance and can reveal one's personality and destiny. The fact that he gave both equal weight tells us a lot about his approach to faith. He was looking for answers everywhere. The Bible was a constant companion throughout his life. He was given his first one as a child, and he read it regularly. He underlined passages and made notes. His knowledge of Scripture was extensive. The gospel songs he recorded were sung with a genuine passion and conviction that came from a deep, personal connection to the material. For him, the Bible was a source of comfort, a connection to his roots, and a guide for living. It represented the traditional faith he was raised in, but he was also drawn to the esoteric and the occult. Or numerology, as detailed in Chiro's Book of Numbers, offered a different kind of insight. It promised a secret knowledge, a way to decode the universe and find one's place in it. The book, written by the famous clairvoyant Chero William John Warner, teaches how to analyze the numbers in one's name and birth date to understand personality traits and predict future events. For Elvis, a man whose life seemed both blessed and cursed, the idea that there was a hidden order to it all, a destiny written in numbers, must have been incredibly appealing. It was a system of control, a way to make sense of the chaos of his life. This blending of traditional religion and esoteric beliefs was not contradictory to him. He was trying to build his own personal faith, taking bits and pieces from different sources. He was looking for a spiritual system that could explain his extraordinary life. Why was he, a poor boy from Tupelo, chosen for such fame? What was the purpose of it all? For traditional religion gave him a moral framework and a connection to God. Numerology gave him a sense of a pre-written destiny and a set of tools for self-analysis. He used both. This shows a man with an open, curious, but perhaps undisciplined mind. He was not a theologian, he was a seeker, grabbing onto any belief system that offered a glimmer of hope or understanding. Did he use numerology to make decisions in his career or personal life? Did he find a conflict between his Christian faith and his interest in what some would call the occult, or did he see them as 2 sides of the same coin? Was his search for hidden meanings in numbers a way to find a sense of purpose in a life that, despite its fame, felt increasingly meaningless? Number 8. Why was the room kept at a frigid, meat locker temperature? The upstairs of Graceland was notoriously cold. Elvis insisted on keeping the temperature at a level that most people would find unbearable. Visitors often had to wear sweaters or jackets. He used powerful air conditioning units, running them year-round, to maintain this Arctic environment. This was not just a personal preference for a cool room, it was an extreme measure that points to his physiological state and his psychological needs. One of the primary reasons was likely related to his drug use and his weight. Opiates can affect the body's ability to regulate temperature. More significantly, his obesity and poor health would have made him feel hot and uncomfortable much of the time. The constant, intense cold would have provided physical relief. It was a way to soothe his laboring body. It also had a practical purpose. His famous stage jumpsuits were heavy, ornate, and incredibly hot under the stage lights. After a show, he would be drenched in sweat and exhausted. The freezing room would have been a welcome shock to his system, a way to cool down rapidly. But there was a psychological component as well. The extreme cold created a sterile, controlled environment, almost like a cryo chamber. It was another way of separating his private world from the hot, humid Memphis climate outside. The cold was a barrier. It was stark and unchanging, a contrast to the emotional turmoil of his life. It might have also helped him sleep. Many people find it easier to sleep in a cold room, and for a chronic insomniac like Elvis, anything that might help him find rest would have been taken to an extreme. The frigid temperature also contributed to the morgue-like atmosphere that some visitors described. Combined with the heavy, light-blocking curtains, the room was like a cave cold, dark, and cut off from the outside world. It was a space that was not conducive to life and energy. It was a space for hibernation, for withdrawal. The cold was a physical manifestation of his emotional isolation. He was creating an environment that was as numb as he was trying to make himself with drugs. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, where the normal sensory inputs from the world, warmth, sunlight, were deliberately shut out. Did the extreme cold have a negative impact on his already fragile health, particularly his respiratory system? How did his girlfriends and friends tolerate living in such an uncomfortable environment? Was the cold a conscious choice to create a specific atmosphere, or was it just another symptom of a body and mind that were completely out of balance? Number 7. What does a stash of junk food say about his southern roots and his self-destruction? While Elvis's bedroom had the features of a hospital room, it also had the features of a teenager's dream hideout. Stashed around the room, and in the small refrigerator he kept there was a constant supply of junk food. Cases of Pepsi, Eskimo pies, hot dogs, cheeseburgers, and burnt bacon were always on hand. This was the fuel that powered his nocturnal life, and it was a direct link to his past and a major factor in his future, or lack thereof. The food he loved was the food of his childhood. He grew up poor in the South, and for him, food was never just sustenance. It was comfort, it was love, and it was a symbol of having made it. He could now eat as much as he wanted of anything he wanted. The classic Southern comfort foods, fried, salty, and sweet, were his favorites. The peanut butter and banana sandwiches, often with bacon, are legendary. This was not a gourmet palate. It was the palate of a man who found deep emotional solace in the simple, rich foods of his youth. By the end of his life, however, this comfort eating had become a deadly addiction. The junk food was another drug. He used it to soothe his anxiety, to fill the long, empty hours of the night, and to numb his emotional pain. The quantities were staggering. His weight fluctuated wildly throughout the 1970s as he would go on crash diets for tours and then balloon up again afterwards. This yo-yo dieting, combined with the incredibly unhealthy food he was consuming, put an immense strain on his heart and his entire system. The presence of a refrigerator and a constant stash of snacks in his bedroom was part of the enabling system around him. He did not have to go to the kitchen. He did not have to make a choice. The temptation was always within arm's reach. This easy access to high-calorie, low-nutrition food was a key part of his self-destructive pattern. It worked in concert with the prescription drugs. The sedatives would make him groggy and lethargic, and the food would provide a temporary rush of pleasure and comfort. It was a vicious cycle. The food contributed to the health problems that he then treated with more drugs. The junk food in his room is one of the most poignant and human details of his final years. It strips away the myth of the rock god and reveals a man trying to fill a spiritual and emotional void with sugar and fat. It was a slow public suicide by food, and his bedroom was the epicenter of this tragic daily ritual. Was there anyone who tried to stop him, or was providing his favorite foods seen as an act of love and loyalty? Did he taste the food anymore, or was he just eating out of pure compulsion? How much did his diet, as much as the drugs, contribute to the heart failure that ultimately killed him? Number 6. Why did he need a home security system he could watch from his bed? Well, Elvis was one of the most protected stars in the world, surrounded by bodyguards and living behind the famous gates of Graceland. Yet, his bedroom was equipped with a closed-circuit television system that allowed him to monitor the grounds of the estate from his bed. He could switch between different cameras, watching the front gate, the driveway, and other areas. This was not standard home security for the 1970s. This was a professional-grade surveillance system, and it speaks to a level of paranoia that went far beyond reasonable safety concerns. The security system was another extension of his desire for control. From his bed, he could be the all-seeing eye of Graceland. He could see who was coming and going. He could watch the fans who gathered daily at the gates. This act of watching, of observing, put him in a position of power. He was the watcher, and everyone else was the watched. This reversed the dynamic he experienced in his public life, where he was the one constantly being observed and photographed. In his private sanctuary, he turned the cameras back on the world. This need for surveillance was fueled by real and imagined threats. He received his share of strange letters and threats from obsessed fans over the years. His fame made him a target. The security system was a practical response to this. But it also fed his isolation and his fears. Instead of feeling safer, the constant monitoring may have made him feel more besieged, more aware of the world outside his walls that he had to be protected from. He was the king in his castle, watching for invaders at the gate. The system also served another purpose. It allowed him to manage his own environment. He could see when a guest arrived or when a delivery was being made. It gave him information, and information is power. It meant he was never surprised. He could prepare himself for any interaction. This level of control is common among people who suffer from severe anxiety. The world feels chaotic and unpredictable, so they create a small, manageable environment where they know everything that is happening. His bedroom, with its TVs, intercom, and security monitors, was the ultimate control room. It was his bubble, and he had a screen for every aspect of the world he wanted to engage with or hide from. Did he spend hours just watching the static images on the security monitors like another form of television? Did the system ever capture a real threat, or was it just a tool to soothe his own internal anxieties? What does it say about a person when their own home feels like a place that needs to be under constant surveillance? Number 5, what was the last thing he said into his black rotary phone? In an age before cell phones, the telephone was a lifeline. In Elvis's bedroom, there was a black rotary phone on his bedside table. It was one of his primary tools for communicating with the outside world, and he used it constantly during his long, sleepless nights. He would call friends, business associates, and sometimes even radio DJs, all from the comfort of his bed. The phone was his connection, but also a symbol of the distance between him and everyone else. The last known phone call Elvis made was in the early morning hours of August 16, 1977. He spoke to his personal physician, Dr. Nikopoulos. The subject of the call was his ongoing health problems, specifically a toothache and a sore throat. He was in pain and couldn't sleep. Dr. Nikopoulos prescribed more medication, which was a typical interaction between the two. This final call is a mundane but tragic snapshot of his reality. His last communication was a plea for relief from physical pain, a pain that was a constant companion in his life. The rotary phone itself is a significant object. Unlike a modern smartphone, it was a stationary object. It tethered him to his room. He had to be in that specific spot to make his calls. This reinforced the bed as the center of his world. The act of dialing a rotary phone is also slow and deliberate. It requires more effort than pushing buttons. It is a relic from a different era, and in a way, so was Elvis. He was a man out of time, struggling to find his place in the changing world of the late 1970s. The phone represents his failed connections. Despite having the ability to call anyone in the world, he was profoundly lonely. His conversations were often rambling and nocturnal, the product of a mind clouded by drugs and insomnia. He would talk for hours, seeking connection, but the very nature of his life, the fame, the isolation, the enabling inner circle made true, honest communication almost impossible. He was talking, but was anyone really listening, or were they just placating the king? The phone was a tool for outreach, but it couldn't bridge the gap that fame had created between him and the rest of humanity. His last call was not to a lover or a family member about his emotional state, but to a doctor about his physical symptoms. What were the other calls he made that night, and what did they reveal about his state of mind? Did he ever use the phone to try and get help for his addictions, or was it only used to obtain more drugs? In a room filled with advanced technology for the time, like multiple TVs and a security system, why did he still use an old, clunky rotary phone? Number 4. Why did heavy, blackout velvet curtains cover all the windows? Elvis Presley lived his life in a self-imposed darkness. The windows in his bedroom were covered with heavy velvet curtains. But that was not enough. The windows themselves were covered in tinfoil, and the curtains were pinned together to ensure that not a single ray of sunlight could penetrate the room. His bedroom was a black, silent cave. This was a crucial element of the artificial world he had constructed for himself. The primary reason for the blackout conditions was his inverted schedule. Elvis was a nocturnal creature. He came alive at night and slept during the day. This pattern started early in his career as a way to avoid the crowds and have some semblance of a normal life after dark. But by the 1970s, it had become a rigid and unhealthy routine. To sleep while the sun was shining, he needed absolute darkness. The curtains and tinfoil were a practical necessity for his upside-down life. But the darkness was more than just practical, it was symbolic. He was literally shutting out the world. The sunlight represented the daytime world, the world of normal life, of business and responsibilities, a world he no longer felt a part of. His room was a womb-like space, a place where he could retreat from all external stimuli. The darkness, combined with the freezing temperature, created an environment of sensory deprivation. It was a place at a time where the normal cues of day and night did not apply. In that darkness, he could create his own reality. This constant darkness had a profound impact on his physical and mental health. The human body's circadian rhythms are regulated by light exposure. Living in perpetual darkness would have completely disrupted his natural sleep-wake cycle, likely worsening his insomnia and contributing to his depression. It is a well-documented phenomenon that lack of sunlight can lead to seasonal affective disorder SAD and other mood disorders. Elvis was inducing these conditions artificially year-round. The blackout curtains were a key part of the Graceland bubble. They shielded him from the prying eyes of fans and the press. They created a space where he could be completely private. But they also cut him off from the natural world and from reality itself. The darkness was a comfort, a shield, but it was also a prison. It was a physical manifestation of the darkness he was wrestling with internally. He had blocked out the light in his room, just as he was slowly extinguishing the light within himself. How long could he go without seeing daylight? Did the constant darkness warp his sense of time and reality even further? Was there anyone in his life who tried to open the curtains and let the sun in, both literally and metaphorically? Number 3, what does his personal Bible with its underlined passages tell us? Amid the chaos of pill bottles, junk food, and electronic gadgets, there was an object of profound quietness, Elvis's personal Bible. He owned several, but the one he kept close was heavily used. Its pages were filled with his own handwriting. He underlined verses, circled passages, and wrote notes in the margins. This was not a prop. It was the workbook of a man engaged in a deep and personal conversation with God. The passages he marked reveal the themes that preoccupied him. He was drawn to verses about forgiveness, redemption, and the search for purpose. He heavily underlined parts of the Psalms, the Book of Job, and the Gospels. These are texts that grapple with human suffering, doubt, and the nature of faith. It is clear that he was not just passively reading, he was actively searching for answers to the big questions in his life. He was trying to reconcile his immense success with his personal torment. One famous note he wrote in his Bible was, "To judge a man by his weakest link or deed is like judging the power of the ocean by one wave." This is a powerful and self-aware statement. It shows a man who knew he was flawed, who was aware of his weaknesses, but who also believed there was more to him than his mistakes. He was pleading for a more compassionate, holistic view of himself, perhaps from God, from others, or from himself. His Bible was a place where he could be vulnerable, where he could confess his struggles without fear of judgment. The Bible stands in stark contrast to the other spiritual books he read, like those on numerology or mysticism. The Bible was his foundation, his spiritual home base. The other books were explorations, side trips on his spiritual journey. But he always came back to the Christian faith of his upbringing. The gospel music he sang was not just a performance, it was a prayer. His personal Bible is the physical evidence of that private, lifelong prayer. It shows that beneath the jumpsuit and the swagger, there was a humble, seeking soul, a man who, like King David in the Psalms, was crying out to God from a place of deep pain and confusion. What specific passages did he turn to in his darkest moments? Did he ever find the peace and forgiveness he was so desperately searching for in its pages? How did he reconcile the teachings of humility and simplicity in the Bible with the extravagant and excessive lifestyle he was living? Number 2, how many pills were in the room and why was no one stopping him? The most damning and tragic evidence found in Elvis's bedroom was the sheer volume of prescription drugs. The room was a private pharmacy. There were bottles of pills on nightstands, in drawers, and in medical bags. According to the 1979 investigation by the ABC News program 2020, in the first 8 months of 1977 alone, Dr. Nikopoulos had prescribed Elvis over 10,000 doses of sedatives, amphetamines, and narcotics. The variety and quantity were staggering. The list of drugs included powerful opioids like Dilaudid, Demerol, and Percodan for pain. He took sedatives and hypnotics like Valium, Quaaludes, and Placidol to sleep. And he used stimulants and diet pills like Dexedrine to wake up and to control his weight. He was caught in a deadly chemical cycle, using uppers to counteract the effects of the downers. His body was a battlefield of competing pharmacological effects. The toxicology report after his death found 14 different drugs in his system, 10 in significant quantities. This massive collection of pills tells a story of a completely broken medical system, at least when it came to Elvis. Dr. Nikopoulos and other doctors were clearly acting as enablers, providing him with any drug he requested. Dr. Nick would later argue that he was trying to control Elvis's intake, that if he didn't prescribe the drugs, Elvis would get them from more dangerous sources. He saw himself as a gatekeeper, not a dealer, but the end result was the same. The man was being supplied with a lethal quantity of medication by a licensed physician. The Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners eventually revoked Dr. Nikopoulos' license, but it was too late for Elvis. The pills also represent his total isolation from accountability. No one in his inner circle had the power or the courage to stop him. They were all on his payroll. Their livelihoods depended on him. To challenge his drug use would have meant risking their job, their friendship, and their place in the gilded cage of Graceland. So they became co-conspirators in his slow suicide. They would fetch his pills, rationalize his behavior, and protect him from the outside world. The bedroom, with its mountain of pill bottles, was the scene of a crime that had many silent witnesses but no one who would intervene. It was the quiet, sterile, and legally prescribed epicenter of a deadly addiction. Why did the pharmacists who filled these massive prescriptions not raise an alarm? Was Dr. Nikopoulos a well-meaning but weak man caught in an impossible situation, or was he a willing accomplice in Elvis's destruction? If Elvis had not been a global superstar, would any doctor in America have prescribed him a fraction of those drugs without being immediately investigated? Number 1, why was The Impersonal Life the last book he ever read? He died in his bathroom. But just before he went in there, he was in his bed reading. The book he took with him was The Impersonal Life. It was a small pocket-sized book first published anonymously in 1914, written by Joseph S. Benner. The fact that this specific book was in his hands during his final moments of consciousness is perhaps the most profound clue we have about his state of mind at the end. The Impersonal Life is a piece of esoteric spiritual literature. It is written as if God is speaking directly to the reader. The core message of the book is that the individual self, the I that we think we are, is an illusion. The true self is the universal spirit, the I am that is God. The book is a guide to transcending the personal ego and realizing this divine consciousness within. It teaches that all our problems, our fears, our desires, our suffering, come from identifying with the limited personal self. The path to peace is to let go of that self and allow the impersonal divine life to live through you. For Elvis Presley, a man whose personal self had become a global brand and a heavy burden, this message must have been incredibly powerful. The Elvis identity was a prison. He was trapped by his own image, his own legend. The book offered him an escape. It told him that Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was not who he really was. It was just a role he was playing. His true identity was something eternal, divine, and free from the pain and pressure of his celebrity life. It is not a book about religion. It is a book about consciousness. Ginger Alden confirmed that he was reading this book on the morning of his death. He was excited about it. He felt he was on the verge of a spiritual breakthrough. This changes the narrative of his death. It was not just a squalid end for a drug addict. It was also a moment of intense spiritual seeking. In his final hours, he was not escaping into drugs for oblivion, but into a spiritual text for enlightenment. He was grappling with the biggest questions of identity and existence. He was trying to find a way to let go of the Elvis that was killing him and to connect with the I am that he hoped would save him. The tragedy is that he never got the chance to see where that path would lead. His body, ravaged by years of abuse, gave out before his spirit could find the liberation it was searching for. The impersonal life is the final, poignant piece of the puzzle of his bedroom. It shows a man who, at the very end, was still looking for a way out, a way up. Like he was looking for a truth that was bigger than his own myth. Was he on the brink of a genuine spiritual transformation that could have saved his life? Or was this book just another form of escapism, a more high-minded drug to distract him from his physical reality? If he had been able to truly embrace the message of the impersonal life and let go of his ego, who would he have become?